Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So it's that time of week again. It's our usual Friday night live. So I know I've not been here for the last couple of weeks. Life's just got really hectic. I was working one night, and last week I came up to do the live, but we were all a little bit ill. So when I came up, I sort of sat here, got the computer ready, got everything ready, and then I fell asleep 10 minutes before the live, and then I woke up a couple of hours after, and I was like, "Oh, what's just happened?" I see Graham texted me, and he was asking me what happened to the live, and I'm like, "Oh man, I just, we've all had food poisoning or some kind of stomach bug, and we've all been throwing up, and I was just so weak, just didn't have the strength to carry on." But tonight it's a little bit more special. Like I told you a couple of weeks ago, we've got a special guest interview with a really important person, someone who's a teacher of permaculture, someone who has been teaching permaculture for a very long time, has over 1,000 students, has written a couple of books on permaculture. So hopefully it's going to be a lot of benefit for a lot of people. So without further ado, so if you guys are joining me on TikTok, you're not going to be able to see my guest properly. So I'd suggest you come over and watch me on YouTube. It'll be a lot more beneficial and a lot more interactive here. If you can join me over on my YouTube channel, much better. It'll be a lot better for you, and we'll get going. Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one today. So I hope everyone's ready. Just to give you a little bit of background about our guest, his name is Aranya Austin. He's a permaculture design teacher, and he's an author living in East Cornwall. He's been teaching for over 19 years. And in that time, he's taught more than 100 two-week permaculture design courses. Now, if you know what a permaculture design course is, a PDC, it's a really intensive course covering a lot of aspects of permaculture. He's got over 1,000 students. He's also teaching a senior diploma in permaculture. He's had this, he's really passionate about teaching and passing on this knowledge to other people. So if you are interested in learning, there's a link to his YouTube channel at the top of this chat, so you can go on and have a look at what some of the stuff he's talking about and some of the stuff that he's doing. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on our guest. So guys, if you are joining us over on TikTok, come over onto YouTube and you'll have a much better chance of seeing everything over here. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on our guest, and I apologize in advance if I can't get to your comments. But yeah, we're gonna focus it on interview, and we'll have sort of 15-20 minutes at the end for questions. So let's get our guest on without any further ado. So Aranya, how are you doing? I hope I pronounced your name right and I haven't just mangled it. So
no, it's all absolutely perfect. Aranya, yes, that's it.
Aranya, okay. So you're live on our YouTube channel. We've got 18 people watching at the moment. So I was just giving everyone a little bit of background about you, about how you've been teaching permaculture for 19 years, how you've got over 1,000 students, taught over 100 PDCs. So can you tell us a little bit about what permaculture is?
Why did you think the course lasts for 2 weeks?
I know I've gone in with a massive subject or a massive question straight off the bat, but if you can give us a little bit of summary of what sort of things permaculture looks at, whether how it covers growing, how it covers different things. What is permaculture?
I think at the heart of permaculture, there's about trying to make our supply chains and the world around us more resilient, because nature is both resilient and efficient at doing things. And we in a modern world tend to be focusing much more on making things more efficient, but then we trade off resilience, which ultimately means we're more vulnerable. So many of us now just get food from shops, and that's grown the other side of the world sometimes, and that comes along, and you've only got to get fuel shortages or train strikes or something like that, and then suddenly the whole thing dries up, or a war halfway around the world, and then that. And so permaculture really is about, it came out originally from the 1970s oil crisis, a couple of Australian guys, and they were looking at everything that relied upon oil, and when oil was short and expensive and OPEC was sort of holding back oil supplies and there was a shortage. And I was a child. I remember being sat in the back of my dad's car queuing at a petrol station at one point when I was about 8 or something. So I have a very vague memory of that time, but they were looking at that and saying, we're really vulnerable. And how do we learn from our ancestors how they've done things in the past? So our human cultural wisdom, but also learning from nature to see how nature creates resilience. And so permaculture is about just sort of making everything safer for us all in terms of thinking about where our food and the water comes from and so on. And the most, I suppose, the obvious thing where we tend to associate permaculture with some kind of gardening is because growing food for ourselves does make us a bit safer. Because even if the food runs out, if you know how to grow food and you're connected with other people that grow food and you know about seeds and you're part of a seed network and you can grow food and share food, then that immediately makes us safer, more resilient. Does that make sense? And so permaculture looks at that, but also everything that's associated with that. So we end up looking at how do we build houses and look after our energy needs and clean water and look after soil. And even sort of how do we make decisions, because that way of thinking can go into all kinds of different areas of our lives. And that really is why we spent 2 weeks just introducing what permaculture is and pointing people at a whole bunch. It's like going to a huge buffet and you can choose what you like, but you want to try a few things first. And often people will come on the course and say, right, now I know I want to become an eco builder or something, or I want to become a gardener. And so it's just a way of signposting, giving some ideas, and then people go off and do their thing. And I particularly love it when I see people later. I go somewhere like a local food growing project, and then I meet somebody who was on a course with me 5 years ago, and they're doing this thing, and that's just fantastic. So yeah, I love it. That's why I've taught so many courses, because I get so much back from it as well.
I can imagine how rewarding it must be. Just when someone says that, look, I learned this from you and I managed to do this. I've had quite a few people come back to me just who've come back and said, look, I've never grown anything before. I watch a YouTube video and I managed to grow some lettuce, or I managed to grow some tomatoes. And it's like, yes, your knowledge has helped feed someone. It might not have changed their world, but they've taken something that you've helped them with, and then they've turned that into a practical, and then they've eaten from that, and that sharing of food, sharing of knowledge, it just crosses so many boundaries and so many cultures and so many different barriers that we've got. And that's one of the things that I really love about doing this YouTube and reaching out to people. So what was the last course that you've been teaching on, or are you teaching on a course at the moment?
No, I finished last weekend. So we were on Dartmoor at a place called the High Hadacombe Centre. I love it there. It's very wild. It's right on the edge of the moor. And sadly, the person who sort of got the whole thing going 15 years ago and started getting permaculture courses there, because this was our 26th permaculture course just at that venue. She died a few years ago. So the gardening side of things that she used to do has sort of tailed off a bit because, well, she's no longer there. But it's still a very beautiful venue to be. You're on the moor, edge of the moor, everything's going golden. It's quite wild, but it's also beautiful and quiet, and there's a night sky and you can see the stars. And yeah, and also, and that's lovely. And then I get to come home again and reconnect with my garden. That's always the hardest thing, really, is the going away is great, but I also miss being at home, because when you plant things, particularly, and as a gardener, as a gardener, you get to become a better observer, don't you? You start to see things that perhaps you didn't see before you became a gardener. You know, who's eating that, and what's pollinating that, and who's going to eat that thing that's eating my cabbage? But you know, it's not my cabbage because I planted it, but the cabbage is its own cabbage, and other things are going to have been eating that cabbage for longer than we have. So it's about, yes, so that gets us into some interesting aspects of permaculture. So there's the ethics of permaculture. There's 3 ethics, and there are principles. So we could start with the ethics. So one of them is fair shares, or sharing surplus. So in my gardening, I always look to overplant a bit, knowing that somebody's going to eat some of those, and I just put a few extra in, and it always seems to work out. And sometimes we get extra because nobody eats them. But you know, with brassicas, there's always somebody wanting to eat the brassicas. And then there's also the other 2 ethics are care of the earth, which is the overriding ethic, really, because you know, if we don't care for the earth is where we come from, and we're made of the earth. It's just passing through us temporarily. And then the other one is care of people. You know, it's to look after each other, and that's sort of building our social network. And again, when you come into permaculture, that's something, you know, for me was a very powerful thing, to start meeting people of a like mind who feel, you know, this is something I can do to make a positive difference for myself and for my community and the world around me. And it's just, yeah, it's because it's inspiring, because I came from a place where I was very much, I don't want that to happen I don't want that in my world, and I don't want that in my world. And then permaculture came along and it said, hey, and you can do these things. And I went, yes, that's it. And it was while I was starting to learn to garden as well in my 20s. Yes, the person, I was doing animal rescue at a rescue centre, and the founder's mum was a gardener, and I started to learn from her, and she was sort of 40 years older than I was, but she had gardening knowledge, and she'd been doing it a long time, and I got to learn some things, and also learn some things by, you know, doing it wrong. And that's also a great thing of the garden, isn't it? Because every year you get another go. So
was it gardening that got you into permaculture?
I got kind of, yes, I would say so. And when we were doing the animal rescue stuff, we had cows and sheep and pigs and everything. So it was like a farm, but with some cats and dogs as well. So I learned loads about animals, which subsequently, of course, that comes into permaculture, because permaculture is also about how do we farm more regeneratively as well. So there's that aspect of things. I mean, personally, I don't eat animals, but then it's lots of people do, and a lot of those farming practices are quite destructive as well. So it's also about looking after land. So yeah, it's very broad. It looks at so many different things, and for each of us can just find what's important to us, and then use permaculture to create a better world that looks like the world we want it to be. If that makes sense, because it's a method of taking what we understand from nature and doing a bit of a design. Design can be a bit of a scary word, but it's fairly straightforward. You just follow. I wrote my first book. I actually haven't finished the second one yet. My first book is this one. I don't know if you can see that. There we go.
Permaculture design.
Step-by-step guide to permaculture. There we are. So it's do this, then do that, and then do that. So I wanted to make it straightforward. And when I was teaching courses over 6 weekends, we had people would be on the course for the weekend, then go away for 3 weeks, and then come back and be saying, what were we doing? And so I created these little worksheets. So go away, do these things, come back, and we'll do the next bit. And it ended up being a book. So that was rather good. Yes, that worked out nicely. And permaculture also has principles. And so one of the principles is multiple functions for each element. So it was worksheets, but then it also got turned into a book. So
by doing one thing, you managed to hit a hammer another nail.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you a little funny story about how I got into permaculture.
Cool. Yeah.
I was, when I first started gardening, not when I first started gardening, but when we moved to this house and we first built our greenhouse, I was looking at ways of heating our greenhouse.
Yeah.
So I went down the rabbit hole of rocket stoves, on underground rocket stoves.
Oh, wow. That's quite a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I went from looking at what a rocket stove was, and then it was I came across a video of a bunch of guys sticking a rocket stove and venting all the fumes through the beds underneath through a vent and then out the side of the greenhouse. And I was thinking, that looks interesting. Let's have a bit more of a look at that. And then it was like, okay, go on to permies.com and find out what this. You know, if you want to watch more. So I went onto there, had a look on there, and permaculture is something a little bit different. Let's have a look at this. And then I just carried on down that road. So we've gone through. I mean, most of my knowledge comes from my parents.
Of course, yeah.
From my mum. She's my greatest teacher. So most of that, pretty much everything I know about growing food has come from her. Just even the way we set up our garden is just been set up like the typical village, that we'd have my mum would have grown up in. I mean, we haven't got any cows, unfortunately. We've not got enough land to have cows here, but the way that the village set up, the boundaries, having the fruit trees on the edge or timber trees on the edge, and then your little chickens and ducks a little bit closer and a little bit of a growing area. So like the zoning systems, but it's slightly different. So yes, we follow the same zoning systems where you have your least intensive or least attention requiring plants on the edge, and the closer attention plants closer to you. The way I've set my garden up is we've had to make little changes because I have young children, so we want to be able to look out the window and see the playing area and see where the kids are. Because if we start bringing the garden close to the house, then the playing area will be at the bottom of the garden and you won't be able to see the kids. So we've had to reverse that, and so a little bit of compromise. But even if you think about zone 1, my most important thing are these little creatures running around in my garden. So they're the ones that need the most attention.
They do. Yes. Hence putting them right there. It's perfect.
So around the ethics of permaculture, you mentioned there was earth care. So this is a lot of where gardening comes into it. And regenerative farming, although the term has been started to be sort of stolen and used for things that aren't that regenerative, but that's the nature of things, isn't it? Sustainable. I mean, it's almost like the way the organic label sort of disappeared, because organic seemed to be like a great way of growing vegetables. It's going to be pesticide free. It's going to be herbicide free. It's going to be plastics free. It's going to be really good for you. But the way I think about it now is organic doesn't really mean a lot anymore. I was visiting an organic farm not so long ago, and okay, they don't use herbicides and they don't use pesticides, or they use some, but the ones that are approved
organic.
Yes. But they were melting tons of plastic, so everything was covered in plastic. The mulch was plastic, and they were just melting that into it. They were coming around at the end of the season when it was a bit battered and worn. They were just blowtorching it. And I was like,
yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
What about all that plastic, all those microplastics, all of those chemicals from that leaching onto your food? What's happened to that? Where's the organic? And when I suggested wood chips, that's not allowed because it's not organic. What?
No.
Hey, what? It's like,
that's the nature of systems. Yeah, I mean, the second book, I haven't quite finished it, but I'm hoping to finish it this winter. But that looks at things like systems and how systems don't always make sense in that way, that you can't use wood chip because it's not certified organic, but it's probably just been a tree that's grown somewhere and somebody's come along and cut it down and had to chip up the brash, and no sprays have been used on it, but it's not certified organic, so you can't use it. And yeah, as you say, but you can use plastics. So Yeah.
See, this is one of the things that it's just a little bugbear of mine, that sometimes when you start putting labels and start putting this, when you start putting a fence around what the thing is,
Yeah,
it starts becoming restrictive. Whereas with permaculture, it's like everything's permaculture. And
in the right place. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Anything could be permaculture, pretty much, not
yeah.
entirely, but yeah, there's many more possibilities. Yes.
No, I mean, what I mean by everything's permaculture is everything is impacted. So how I'm going to dry my clothes after I've done my washing up, that's permaculture.
Yeah.
Am I going to stick my tumble dryer on, or am I going to, it's a nice sunny day, am I going to go stick them on the washing line? Do you see what I mean? So when I say everything's permaculture, I'll clarify what I mean by that. Is
so we can apply permaculture thinking to anything.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Yeah.
So the other permaculture ethic you mentioned was people care. Gives a little bit more of a insight into that.
It's another interesting one, isn't it? Because we're not very good at it at the moment, are we, human beings? Sadly, not all of I'm not saying all of us are not good at it, but collectively we seem to be struggling. And I think if you step back and say, what do we tend to fight over resources? Governments, countries go to war over resources, and usually because there's a shortage of food or water, or the land's degraded and people are migrating, or climate change, rising sea levels. And so in permaculture, we're trying, we say, let's tackle the root cause of this, and then so the problem doesn't come away from that. Does that make sense? So, how can we build soils and clean water and grow food in a healthy way and feed each other and those kind of things? So rather than trying to legislate from above, we say at grassroots and our communities and individuals, what decisions can we make to turn that around? And of course, we got here gradually, a few steps at a time, and so the journey back will be similar. It's not going to suddenly change overnight, but if we start heading back in the right direction, and permaculture can give us the tools to do that. And of course, people caring for each other is an important step in that, part of that. Absolutely.
So in terms of our day-to-day life or day-to-day systems, what sort of thing would fall into people care?
Oh, yes. Well, all kinds of things. So looking after ourselves, obviously. So in my 20s, I was sort of quite activisty. And because at that age, many of us feel like we're kind of invincible. And I did a lot of running anyway. So it was like, I can carry on forever. And then we forget about our health. And then when I was about 24, I got glandular fever, which wiped me out for a couple of weeks. It was during the Olympics, and you can't sleep, basically. I don't know if you've had it, but you don't sleep, and you can't eat or drink either. So you're in this weird hallucinogenic state. And the Olympics was on Los Angeles. I think it was in 1984. No, it was the one afterwards, 1988, I think. Anyway, and so it was happening in the middle of the night, and then they were showing it all day. So I just remember watching the Olympics about 5 times over and over again, and then you get the next day. And so then that really was a bit of a wake-up call that actually it's important to look after ourselves. Looking after others is important, but also if we don't look after ourselves, we can't look after others and be part of our community. And it's, looking after others does involve some of us needing help sometimes, but we all get ill from time to time. That's just normal. And so, sort of people care. It's just, I think, also about being more aware of other people, and that expands, of course, into nature as well. There's sort of that empathy for other people's plights, but also nature and in the garden. And this thing is just eating something that I want to eat, but it was probably here before I was, and we can share. I don't need the entire thing. So
this is one of the things that I see a lot of people who have graduated or completed the PDC is they go on and do a lot of community projects, so community-based farming or mindfulness programs or wellness retreats or something like that. They seem to do a lot more to try and help people. Even so, the sort of misconception that I'm trying to address is they've gone to a PDC and they've come out and they're not going into gardening, but they're going into doing community projects. So some people, like I saw a really cool one where they were recycling bikes. So you know, they were finding scrap bits of bikes from scrap metal dealers and all sorts, and then putting together a good bike and then handing it over to little kids. And I thought, okay, and they've taken that on just from doing a PDC, and it's like, hey, that's a new way of applying, you know, permaculture. There's the recycling going on. There's the people care element, and it's a project that people can get behind as well.
Yeah, and bikes, you know, they keep you fitter. Hopefully, as long as you don't get hit by a car. But thankfully, I don't live in the city. I love my bike. I think I would be a bit nervous if I lived sort of in the middle of London, something cycling. But but just an amazing invention, and so easy to fix. You know, I know some people have great skills at fixing cars, but bikes are kind of easier to learn. I remember when I was a lot younger, I used to take mine apart a lot, put it back together again, make sure every ball bearing was greased. And it's something once you learn, you don't lose that, do you?
No, I mean, once you learn to ride a bike, that's it. I mean, the other ethic as well you've got is fair shares, and I'll be honest, this is one that I've had some issues with in the past, and it's got me into a little bit of trouble as well. For the people who know me know that I'm a bit gobby. So if I've got an itch, I've got to scratch it. Like fair shares, the part of fair share that's always bugged me is around growth to population. That's the part that's always really got under my skin. And I'll talk about it from a personal point of view. One is religious point of view, because the earth is sufficient for humans. That's one of the fundamental beliefs. So whether resources are distributed equally, that's a different thing. But the earth will provide for us if we're not too greedy and taking it all for ourselves. So sometimes when people are talking about controlling population and they're not talking about redistribution, I think there's a bit of a disconnect there. And I've always found that a little bit awkward. It's an awkward one to balance. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's sort of the elephant in the room, isn't it? There's a lot of us, and the way we're trying to consume the capitalist model of having to consume and infinitum in order to pay off a debt which can never be repaid because of the money system. Whereas, yes, when it comes down to meeting our needs, certainly that's worked for humans for a very long time. So, and as you say, it's the inequality, it's that sort of history, the last few hundred years of countries like Britain going and taking resources from other places and accumulating it. And historically, it's a difficult thing. And also, you know, I was born here, but I don't think I did any of that unless I reincarnated from that. I don't know. I don't remember any of that. All I can do is be me now. But
I mean, this is one of the there's a passage in the Quran that says La taziru waziratun wizra ukhra. So you don't bear the sins of another.
Right.
So just like what you were saying there.
Yeah.
So even though our forefathers might have done something, it doesn't automatically mean that we bear the burden of that sin. But at the same time, there's an element of benefiting from that system still.
Yes.
So,
yes.
I mean, I was in London not so long ago, and we're walking around this real centre, where the House of Parliament are and everything else.
Yeah.
And when you look at where that was built from, okay, none of us did it, but that was built from. Or if you go into the British Museum,
full of stuff from other places.
yeah. I mean, so there is a little bit of, there is that we don't bear the sins of that, but there's some work that needs to be done to fix some of that inequality, or some of that inequality that's resulted from it.
Yes, we're in a place that we can either choose to hang on to that, or to give back to others, to help others. And
yeah. I mean, so yeah. Oh, do you know Graham Bell?
Yes. Yeah.
So the late great Graham Bell. Yeah. Sadly, I mean, he passed away not so long ago, and he's going to be a big loss, because he was one of the he was one of the original OGs, wasn't he? Are you of that generation of the sort of OGs of permaculture here, or?
Not quite. I'm sort of the next generation. So I did my PDC in 1996. So whereas Graham and Andy and so on, about 10 years earlier. So so he was somebody. Yes, I mean, his 2 books inspired me, and I found them really good, because they're not too thin, because some books you sort of start them and then they're over with, and other books are totally intimidating. Whereas Graham's books were the perfect size, I thought, that you could pick them up. There was plenty to read, but you got to the end and you felt like you'd achieved. Because often, if you get books, I find if I get a book and I don't finish reading it, I feel like I've sort of missed out, or I've let the author down or something. Whereas Graham's books were just the right size, I think. And he will be missed. But
I had the privilege recently of just before Graham passed away, he got me involved on teaching on a PDC.
Okay. Is that up in Scotland?
Yeah. No, it's one that's going to be based online. So based online through the Soil Food Web. Yeah.
So I've got some videos on that as well.
Okay. So so we've done a couple on there. But initially, see, do you like the PDC? I haven't done a PDC, and I haven't done a PDC for a couple of reasons. I mean, if I'm honest, people look at it and say, "Oh, that he's not done a PDC because he's got a chip on his shoulder." But I haven't done a PDC more from political reasons. Do from my own personal point of view, is we should be trying to teach knowledge. And there's another tradition that we live by, is knowledge is the right of the student, and wherever the student finds it, they need to hunt it down and get it. So knowledge is the prey, and you writing it, that trap. So where we're talking about these sorts of rights, I feel awkward about trying to sell a PDC to people. That's a conflict that I've had within myself. And the other one is, sometimes some of this, how do I say this?
Go for it.
Sometimes you know, so, sometimes they're a little bit wishy-washy.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Mine aren't.
no. I'm sure that the thing is that these are just some little bugbears that I have. I
Yeah.
told you, I don't keep things inside. I just blurt them out.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Gary,
Gary
he's
Finch.
yeah, he's spoken about you a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And
He did my first ever PDC that I taught. He was
yeah,
one of my first students.
see, that's what he's told me. He's told me a lot about you, and that's why I wanted you on here. Um, but I've had this conversation with him a few times, and there's still there's from sort of your generation, from the sort of maybe the OG generation. There's um, a lot of good.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that's the right word. There's a lot of genuineness still,
Yeah.
and as it's tinkered down, I think it's starting to lose a little bit of that genuineness. I don't know if that's just the feeling I get. As
Yeah.
That's just the feeling I get from looking at it from way down. Um, but I'd never sort of say to someone, "Don't do a PDC." Um, uh, I'd never say that to anyone. The thing is, there's always things that you're going to get from a lot of, especially when you've got a lot of different teachers coming at it from a different perspective. You're going to get a lot of benefit from. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's upset you or not.
No, not at all. I just do what I do. Is that yes, the diversity thing is very interesting because I remember teaching in Spain. I did 3 courses on the
Yeah,
outskirts of Marbella, of all places, but they had a really good project there, Arboretum Marbella, and was it the second year? But I remember going there one year, and I was doing the last 4 days, and they'd had about 9 other teachers. And of course, bearing in mind this was being translated into Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. My partner, she's quite good at Spanish, but not good enough to translate. So I'm doing my bit in English, but most people are Spanish. And I just remember, okay, so right, zoning. Has anyone told you about zoning? And people are like, so just that the continuity for me was difficult with lots of different teachers because it wasn't clear for me up front what I was teaching, which bits I was teaching, which bits other people were teaching, and because other teachers had their own sort of angles, and some of them weren't permaculture teachers per se, they were teaching certain things that they were experts in, which sort of fitted into permaculture. And so often, some of my courses is just me for the entire 2 weeks, like a marathon. Right, off we go. But I know what I want to cover, and I know that I'm covering it. And if I haven't covered it, I know I've not covered it because it was me that was supposed to cover it. Does that make sense?
yeah.
But I do, I like to look at the big picture of just all the different places it can go. And I'm renowned for, potentially going off off on a tangent sometimes and telling people, stop me. But this might be a bit of a over there.
Bring me back on track.
It's also about spontaneity. It's about being in the moment. Somebody asks a question and you just say, right, okay, this is topical. Let's follow this thread and see where it goes. And so all courses are a little bit different because of that. And of course, venues have different things as well. So if sometimes I've taught in woodlands where off-grid communities have lived, and that's a very kind of different flavored experience to being somewhere like Organics with Pat's lovely permaculture garden that's been there for 25 years or something. So, and I think people are drawn also to the things that they're most interested in. If they're more woodland orientated, they'll probably do a course in the woodland and so on. So I think that adds a little bit of self-selection in there. But yeah, I think if it's not diverse, then it gets boring. So
that's one of the things that that's one of the things that we've been trying to do here, is sort of bring everything back, because permaculture, if we're digging swales and all this kind of massive earthworks, yeah, it works if you're on a massive 100-acre farm or something like that. But okay, how do we scale that and use those sorts of ideas in the typical backyard? And that's the sort of approach that we've taken, is okay, I don't need a massive swale, but what I could do with is a ditch here to catch my rainwater and soak that into this bed. So it's not a swale and it's not a soak away, but it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
that sort of works in a backyard setting.
Yeah, and most people have backyards that do our courses. You know, we have a larger than average backyard now, but where we were before, we had a tiny one. So it's, I think it's been helpful because I've moved around so much, particularly earlier in my life. I've got a lot of experience at different places and sometimes having very little in the way of gardening space. And now suddenly, you know, we have nearly half an acre, although that includes the buildings, but that feels a lot when we're not using machinery. But also, you know, I look around and I think, oh, damn, there's no room for any more trees, any more fruit trees. How are we going to stack this in? And, you know, I've got grapevines, propagating grapevines, which we bought from the last place. And then we've got 10 of them, and I give some away, but I'm thinking, okay, there's another one. Where am I going to put that? It's just, I love the experiments, the possibilities of trying different things.
Do you ever grow climbing plants up your trees?
Well, the problem we have here in terms of thinking about that, well, there's two issues, isn't there? One is that if you've got a climbing plant that's going to fruit, it will fruit at the top of the tree. So if you've got a big tree, then that's not very helpful. And I'm nearly 60, so I'm not really much of a climber. I was always a runner rather than the climber. I'd love to climb, but I'm not very good at it. So I'm just going to. And then our fruit trees, which we planted here 4 years ago, they're on semi-dwarfing rootstock, so they're only ever going to be 3 or 4 meters across and high. And because we're on quite a windy site as well, I don't really want to add to the wind load on the tree, so they blow over. So we do have things climbing, like Rosa rugosa, climbing into the hedge, which is the windbreak. So we do have climbers, but I'm not planting them specifically by our fruit trees anyway.
One of the things that we do is we grow a lot of pointed gourds, and they're on quite a thin vine.
Yeah.
So we plant them at the bottom of like a plum tree, or a plum tree never produces really, you know, it doesn't produce loads of plums. For some, it's not a very good cropper, but it's a great frame for just to send this pointed gourd up, and it just you know, tangled itself up the tree, and it produces tons of pointed gourds. I mean, I was a good climber when I was a little bit younger. I'm getting a little bit fat now to be climbing, but the kids are now doing it, so they're up the tree squirreling up. And I mean, that, because for the last couple of years I've been talking about giving that plum tree a serious prune, you know, cutting it back really hard, and then I see the kids climbing up it, and I think, I can't touch that tree. I'm just going to leave it as it is, because they just, you know, my daughter's got the cherry tree, my son's got the plum tree, and so they'll just sort of climb up the tree and they'll just talk to each other from across the trees.
Nice.
And now we're going to find a tree for little Zaki for my youngest.
Will it grow fast enough?
I mean, there's other trees in the garden, but they're not close enough to these two. So
okay. Hello from over in the distance.
Yeah. Let's open it up for some questions, because I know I've neglected a lot of people in the chat quite a bit, and I haven't even said hello to a lot of people today. But we've had a special guest on, so I hope you can all appreciate that. And so if you've got any questions for Aranya, fire them away now, and we'll get some answered. So
there's one there I'm spotting straight away, which is confused about permaculture. Is it doable on heavy clay on a slope? And the answer is yes. The permaculture can be applied anywhere. So it's about understanding what you have and then using techniques in order that would work in that place. So what sometimes people sort of get this idea of permaculture is if you've got a compost toilet and you're using hugel beds. But it's not about that at all. They're just techniques that are useful to do certain things. We have a compost toilet because that works for where we are. Not always so easy in an urban garden without very much space. So it's about understanding where you are, observing what you have, and then through permaculture you learn about different things you can do in different circumstances. And the permaculture design is how you put all that together. So you were talking earlier about zoning and putting things close that need more attention and things further away that need less attention. That's one way that we can put things into our design, but also we would think about how we put things together. So an example I use quite often on the course is if you've got ducks, and maybe you're keeping ducks for eggs, for instance, and there's a pond. And ducks love water. They like making ponds very muddy, but that's not always what we want to see. But you could protect your ducks from predators by giving them a little island in the middle of the pond, or maybe a floating island. Obviously, this would be a fairly big pond. And if that's all you're wanting, if you just want eggs, then you place the ducks on the island in the pond, and then predators can't get across the moat. Obviously, you've got to have some kind of system for getting the eggs. Either you can pull the floating island across on ropes or something. Anyway, you figure that out. But if you want the ducks to do some slug control in your garden, then if they're just hanging around the pond, you've got to connect them to the garden. So then we think about how do we relate the ducks and the pond to the garden? Well, if you put the duck house the other side of the vegetable garden from the pond, then the ducks in the morning, their desire line, as we call it, their straight line to the pond is through the vegetable garden. And likewise, going back to their shed at night, they go back through the vegetable garden. Now, slugs tend to be out at night, mostly for good reason, because the ducks are out during the day. So we don't necessarily want to let the ducks into the vegetable garden during the middle of the day, because they might be munching on some leaves and things. So the time to create that interaction is first thing in the morning and last thing at night. So you could have gates on either end, and then you open the gates, the ducks go through, munching some slugs as they go, hang around on the pond all day, and then you open the gates again in the evening and they come back through. So it's thinking about those kind of relationships. And then maybe the pond also reflects light, winter light into your home. Obviously, this would really have to work for your house. But if you've got the space to do this, then, and this is just an example of what we can do, then that winter light reflects off the pond up into the house. So the pond is by the house. But also, if we think about what can we do with the pond, we could potentially use some gravity irrigation to the vegetable garden for watering. So the pond is above the vegetable garden, which then has to be above the duck house, because that's the other side. But then going up the hill a little bit more, you've got the house. And so, well, to the south, you've got the house. So then it's just thinking about all these different relationships and putting it together in that unique context in which you are. And of course, wherever we are is always a little bit different from where we were before, even if it looks quite similar. And that's really what permaculture is. It's about putting things together so that it sort of looks after itself mostly, and we don't have to do too much to get the yields that we want. We're sort of let nature look after it, and we just get to feed a little bit on the outside of that, if that makes sense.
See, just am I right in thinking that question had some heavy clay element in there?
Yes, it's heavy clay, yes.
So just from my personal experiences, our garden is on heavy clay. So we started off with about that much, sort of an inch-ish of topsoil, and then it was just the yellow stuff. So it was just it is yellow and nasty. You know, if you got past the yellow stuff, you're into that blue stinky stuff.
The anaerobic, yeah.
So that's the sort of soil that we had, and the way our budget is, we couldn't afford to buy in tons and tons of compost. So it was, we were growing in the original soil. So we had a problem with our bottom fence, or our bottom fence line. There was a dispute with the neighbour. So the neighbour had built, so my instead of my fence line being straight, the neighbour had, so my bottom garden backs onto 3 other houses. So what the guy at the bottom did was he extended his fence about 3 meters into my garden. So my fence line went sort of straight on 2 ends and then missing chunk, and there was a bit of a dispute over that fence line. So there were 3 ash trees that needed cutting down to get the fence line in the right place, and now I ended up with tons of wood chip.
Yeah,
you know, I ended up with tons of wood chip. I don't know what to do with wood chip, but so I started having to research, okay, what can I do with wood chip? My initial idea was just to compost it, and then I came across Paul Gauchi. Paul Gauchi?
No.
Is that the right name? Well, it might not be the right name. He's in America. He does Back to Eden.
Yeah, I might have heard of that, but probably somebody I don't do a lot of online.
Okay.
Surfing.
I mean, he's probably I'd say he's one of the OGs as well. But he's done a lot of work with wood chips and just growing in wood chips. So I looked at what he was doing, and then we had a chat with my mum. What do we what can we do this? And she was like, okay, yeah, try it and see what happens. So now what we do is we've developed a system where we grow so we've got a crop rotation. So imagine if you're starting on a blank canvas, first year of soil. So we'd start with planting potatoes, and the way we plant our potatoes is we plant our potatoes in a foot or more of wood chips.
Yeah.
So just wood chip straight onto the bare earth. So it doesn't matter how bad your soil is, because you're actually growing in the wood chip. So the tubers are forming in the wood chip, but the feeder root of the potatoes going into the soil as much as it can. It's getting its food from the soil, and it's growing in the wood chip medium. And all the while, the wood chip's breaking down. And by the end of the season, you've got a lot of the worms have moved in. They've dragged that wood chip down. The wood chips naturally decompose, so you've got compost at different levels. You've still got that big rough stuff in the middle of it, but you've got a nice medium that over the next couple of years is going to turn into amazing soil. So the year after, we go for something that's not going to be a root crop, but something that's going to be able to dig down, so quite deep into the soil. So we plant something like squash that isn't going to mind rough soil.
No, because they love compost.
Yeah, it's not going to mind rough soil. It's going to be able to dig its roots down quite a bit. So we plant squash, and then by the time you squash her up the year after, you've got perfect soil to plant anything you want.
Yeah. So you're composting and you're growing things at the same time.
I mean, like lazy beds. So that's a really good way of improving soil. So instead of lazy bedding and building your raised bed, your straw, your composting materials, or trench composting. So we do upside down trench composting. So we just do trench composting without a trench.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
So everything straight on top of the soil, and then just cover it with a bit of cardboard and a bit of wood chip. Come next year, you've got you've got your trench compost, but you didn't have to dig a trench.
Brilliant. Yes.
So it's just good ways of improving soil. So yes, clay can be improved massively. You can improve it with plants as well. There was another question about potatoes. I think Big Mac, you asked about big potatoes. Your potatoes harvest. Is that supposed to say aren't brilliant or are brilliant? I don't know what I'm doing wrong because I follow you both. I'm confused by that question.
It was a bit blighty this year. Where we are in Cornwall, we got blight quite early on potatoes. So our crop wasn't as good this year as it has been.
I've got there's 2 beds of potatoes that I've got this year. One massive bed where I planted into the wood chips like I've done for the last 10 years, and that bed failed. You know, the blight got it. The potatoes just, first of all, the potato plants just looked weak, and then the blight got it, and it just failed. But then right next to it, you know, there's a bed where that's self-seeded potatoes. So, but they were, I mean, they must have been about a meter away from the other bed. Okay. They grew really strong, massive, healthy plants, and then I'm still harvesting potatoes from them now.
So different variety, perhaps with more resistance?
No, same variety. So one of my favorite potatoes to grow, I mean, I like growing them because they taste good. They're supposed to be bred for drought tolerance, you know, Desiree variety.
Yes, I don't know that I've grown it, but obviously I've seen them in the shops. Yes.
I mean, I like them. I mean, they're from, and the good thing I used to like about them, sadly, Wilco's has gone out of business, but you could go and get like a 3 kilo bag of seed potato for a few pounds. Okay. So that was the other good thing that I used to like about them. But it's a potato that's supposed to be drought tolerant or better for droughty conditions. Right. So one of the things that I do with potatoes is the ones that are in the ground. If they get rain, they get rain. Otherwise, I don't water them, because watering potatoes just takes forever, doesn't it?
Well, it can do. If I'm away for 2 weeks teaching, I can't do much about that.
Yeah. So here's one from Tosstone. She's over in New Zealand. As zones changing, I'm able to grow tropical plants in the deep South Pacific with climate change. Is it this a real
climate zones? Yeah, I would say so. Martin Crawford says that where we are in Southwest, so he's in Devon, we're in Cornwall, but he says that we're now the equivalent of 60 years ago. We're now the equivalent of what the middle of the west of France was 60 years ago, if that makes sense. So everything's moving, and that's why it's interesting, because when you come across apple varieties and somebody says, oh, it's a traditional Cornish variety or it's a traditional Devon variety, those will now work best in Wales, for instance, because the climate's moving north, the zones are moving north. So where he reckons that we should be growing in the southwest of England anyway, varieties from, traditional varieties from middle of France, because that's the same climate as we have now. So yeah, that's where it gets interesting, this sort of native and also where things were originally grown, because a lot of varieties of apples, of course, were quite very localized. They grew well in a particular place. So yeah, they're not always the best choices now.
So Margaret saying my dad was born in 1920 and he always said feed the soil.
Yeah.
And your plants will grow. See, it is really important feeding that soil. Building that soil is absolutely essential.
Feed the soil, feed the life in the soil, they'll feed your plants. Someone else had success with the zero?
Had success with what, sorry?
The Desiro potatoes.
Okay.
Yeah, Sal.
Yeah. Sal, when you're saying that you had giant ones, the first year I grew them, I had potatoes that size. You know, they were huge.
That is big.
Perfect for making chips.
I'm sure they are. It's just so satisfying. My partner Jill, she always says, you know, it's just, there's nothing quite like going out into the garden, just going, oh, what are we going to have tonight? Oh, let's have some potatoes, and just go dig them up.
And you know, when you cut into the fresh potato, the sound it makes.
Yeah.
If you ever, I don't know if you ever paid attention to just the sound of cutting through a fresh potato straight out of the ground when you cut. It's almost like a really crisp cut.
Yeah.
Instead of the shop bought potato, it makes like a dull thud. This was like a really sharp crisp, and it's like, oh yes, you know, it's really that's really satisfying. It's one of those things that it might sound a bit geeky, but it's one of the highlights of my year. Just listening to that.
Fact, yes. But with carrots, you know, you go and see carrots in a shop, and you bring it home, and then you pull one out of your own garden, you put them side by side. They're almost two entirely different things, aren't they? It's just come out of the soil, and it's shiny, and it's plump, and it's really bright. And then there's this sad-looking thing that's, I thought that was a fresh carrot, but it's really not, is it? This one is fresh. Yeah.
So let's see what we're. So let's see. We've got. Have we got any more questions? So we've gone past the hour. Are you okay to take a few more questions, or have you had enough?
Yeah, we can do another 10 minutes or so, I think.
Okay.
I can't leave my partner too long because we've got dinner yet. So
yeah. So if anyone's got any more questions for Aranya, fire them away, or forever hold your peace.
We'll have to be back on again.
Yeah, we might do that. I've enjoyed this. I really have. We might do this again.
Good. We could do it with Gary at the same time. He always adds another layer of interesting.
He's always got something. You know, he'll see some of our posts and they'll send me a message with just a couple of lines or something really deep. Here, go and think about this now.
Yeah. How do you deal with drought conditions? Yeah, well, you try and design for it in the first place because, of course, drought. I don't know where you're based, but of course, drought can also mean fire risk. So in permaculture, you design around the local conditions. So if drought is unusual, I mean, we obviously had a bit of drought here the last couple of spring summers. So for us down in Cornwall, where we're supposed to get quite a lot of rain, we sort of do, but we have had 6 or 8 weeks periods of no rain, which seems unusual. We've only been here 4 years, but for a couple of years we were kind of happy with our water system, and then we realized we needed to have more. The tanks ran out, so we got these IBC 1 cubic meter tanks, and we had one at the top, and so they're in different places because obviously you use water in different places and you've got different roofs feeding different ones. And at one point there was, do we need a second tank, or do we just need to attach more roof to the one tank? And that worked for a year because then that filled up again. So because when it rained, it fills up more so that there's more to empty again afterwards. And that worked. And then the following year, we realized that we actually also needed another tank, which we then connected to the other side. But because we were adding a tank at a time, then we weren't over creating water storage. We didn't buy more tanks than we needed. And of course, the other thing about a water tank is it's not just a waste of space. You can grow things over it. So we have grapevines. In one place, it's clematis that was already there. And another one is silverberry that we grow over the tanks so that they protect the tanks from the sun in the summer months. And also they've got thermal mass, so they create a nice microclimate for the plants we're growing. And also they give us food, which is great, lovely fruit. And that just seems to work really well. It's a two-way thing. The tank benefits from the grapevine or the silverberry, and the silverberry benefits from the thermal mass, and it keeps things going for longer. And you've got more surface area because you can grow up the sides of the tank as well as over the top. So that's a classic sort of permaculture approach. Is what am I trying to do? What benefits can I get? Can I put things together to get multiple benefits? And it's just experimenting. We're trying with different kinds of plants, and they all seem to be working well. But sometimes we try things that don't work, and other times, even if somebody else has done it, and this is the thing, that try things, but don't do too much of one thing in case it actually doesn't work for you, because where you are is different. So in terms of drought, drought here is a bit different from drought in a drier, hotter climate. When I was teaching in Spain, he said that it rains for 8 days a year. And for me, that's just, wow, that's really dry. But you obviously develop techniques that deal with dryness. So you're making the most of the water you've got, and you're mulching everything. So
see, just on another practical one is, depend on where your garden is, grey water makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
I mean, in the summer months, we literally I've got a fireman's hose, and I just connect it to the outlet for the bathroom pipe, and it just empties out straight onto the beds, cutting little sort of channels into the soil, so it goes in, soaks in, and just works its way down the bed.
Brilliant.
And when I talk about my beds are like 4 or 5 meters by a couple of meters, so it's not like a little
proper size.
yeah. I don't do those little raised beds. I don't get it. you end up with too many footpaths and not enough growing space. I find you can have big beds and just put stepping stones in.
It's easily done. Somebody's saying, any advice for an overgrown allotment? I think most allotments are overgrown when you get them. That's why people have given them up. Or why they're available is because someone's given them up and not looked after it. But probably lots of mulching and sowing crops that are kind of going to look after themselves. Potatoes are pretty good under a mulch. I don't know. Any thoughts?
I mean, with an overgrown allotment, pace yourself. Don't think you're going to deal with everything in one day. Take it in sections. So what I'd personally, if I was taking on a brand new and it was overgrown, I'd take it on and say, okay, I've got 8 sections that I've got to do in 8 months. Work on one section. Maybe if you're gonna dig it, maybe give it a dig for the first year. I tend not to like digging if I can avoid it, but I'm not. I call myself not a no dig Puritan. So I will dig if I need to dig. Like if you've got some couch grass, I've got no issue with sticking a fork in and pulling the roots out. But at the same time, if I've got no reason to dig, I don't want to dig it.
No, it disturbs the soil layers.
So take it in sections. I mean, find as much cardboard as you can get hold of, and just mulch everything. Perfect time now if it's overgrown with massive long grass. Just chuck cardboard over everything. If you carpet it with cardboard, come springtime, a lot of that's going to be broken down, and then you're going to know what your horrible, stinky, bad weeds are that you've got to dig out and what you don't need to touch.
Mulch will deal with a lot of them.
There was a question about overwintering chilies. You can overwinter chilies. I've got a specific video just on overwintering chilies. Just trim it back, keep either a single stem or just a little skeleton, trim it back, take off all the chilies, take off everything, and get it inside the house. Keep it somewhere warm, not necessarily too much light, and it'll be fine. Come next spring. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one there about sexes of kiwi berries as seedlings. Well, the males tend to be more vigorous, but apart from that, I think this is why you pay for a sexed one, because obviously if you put seeds in, you get loads of them, but in order to get a known sex of a kiwi or whatever it is, then that's going to be propagated vegetatively, so you know what you've got, and that's why they're more expensive. So yeah, you either have to wait for them to flower, which can take a long time, and they'll be quite big by that point, or you just buy. Yeah, but it's fun to find out.
But I think I've taken your 1 hour and your 10 minutes and then some. But yeah, time's actually flown. It really has. It seems to have flown. I've enjoyed this. I don't know how you're feeling. But
I did, absolutely.
And I hope everyone else has enjoyed this. We want you back, so maybe give you a break, and then we want you back.
Hopefully I'll finish the work.
Guys, put a thumbs up in the comments if you want Aranya back.
No pressure.
Well, I want you back. Yeah, I think yeah, it'll be a good conversation to have again, and we can explore a few more things as well. Yeah. But
there's lots to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot of thumbs up coming, and I'm getting bangs at the door from the kids as well. They're trying to get in. They've been under strict orders. They can't disturb me today because I've got a guest on. So
they're just checking that you haven't fallen asleep.
Oh no! I mean, last week I came up to do the live, and I was just feeling so weak. I said, all right, I'm gonna just put my head down for a second, and that was it. I was yeah.
It's good to see you back on form.
But yeah, it's good to be back as well after a little break. Sometimes you need a little break. But yeah, I want to call it a night. Aranya, thank you very much for coming in and giving us your time. I really appreciate it. And
thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, you take care. And everyone else, thank you very much for joining us. And we will see you again next week. So on that note, I'm going to leave it there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. There we go.